The moment Jason Statham stepped inside that fluorescent-lit grocery store, every thought of a peaceful afternoon vanished. An electric buzz, somewhere between the store's humming lights and the low static of its rundown radio, set his nerves on edge. He wasn't there for autographs, photos, or any of the usual crowds that flocked to him outside a film premiere. He was there because he'd seen something unsettling from the parking lot. A single mother had been cornered by two men near the sliding entrance doors, her face pale and her eyes flicking in every direction in search of an escape. Some primal sense within Jason roared to life, and he was through the doors almost before they had fully opened. "Another day in paradise," he muttered under his breath, glancing to see if the mother had managed to get away from the unwelcome attention. If there was one thing Jason despised more than paparazzi hounding his every move, it was bullies. He dealt with them as a scrawny teenager on the streets of Shirebrook, deflecting insults and jibes with a tough mouth and faster hands. Now, after years of playing tough guys on screen, often overshadowing his true personal grit, he knew authentic aggression when he saw it. And these two men had aggression written all over them. He spotted her standing by a rack of discount canned beans, fiddling with her grocery list, hands trembling. She was doing her best to appear invisible. She had short, unkempt hair that suggested a hurried morning, a tired but determined set to her jaw, and a little boy no older than 4 peeking from behind her leg. The child's large brown eyes, wide with curiosity and fear, fixated on the men who hovered a few paces away. Jason watched, hawk-like, as the pair exchanged glances and advanced. Something in the taller man's stance revealed intent. Shoulders rolling forward, posture that screamed intimidation. The single mother clutched her son's hand more tightly. Jason cut across the store, quietly weaving through the produce section before snagging a plastic bag of fresh apples. He held it casually, but in his mind, the bag might as well have been a set of nunchucks. "Jason," came a voice from the corner. It was an older woman stocking shelves, apron slightly stained from a day's work. She recognized him instantly. "Aren't you?" He pressed a finger to his lips, casting a quick glance her way. "Just here for a few things," he said, voice low but warm. The woman blinked, more bemused than starstruck, and gave a slight nod, returning to her task. All Jason wanted was to avoid a scene, especially one that would end up on every social media platform. But if it meant protecting a mother and her kid, he'd gladly sacrifice anonymity. He turned down the aisle. From his vantage point, he saw the mother whisper something to her child, likely reassurance, before turning to confront the men. "Please," she said, voice trembling. "Just leave us alone." One of the men snickered, a short, brittle sound. "Ma'am, I was just admiring your cart," he said in a syrupy tone that contradicted the hostility in his eyes. "You're carrying a lot. Mind if we—" "You should listen to her," Jason interrupted, stepping up beside them. He kept his tone measured but firm. His accent, crisp and unmistakable, cut through the tension. "She asked you nicely." Both men turned in unison, their sneers morphing into wide-eyed surprise. Jason's presence was smaller and leaner than they might have expected from a big-screen action hero, but there was an unmistakable hardness in his stare. "Who the hell do you think you are?" spat the shorter of the two, though his bravado deflated slightly the moment he recognized the face glaring back. "Just another shopper," Jason replied. He let a faint smile tug at one corner of his mouth. "And you're my way." His quip seemed to rile them up. The taller man squared his shoulders, stepping a fraction closer, looking ready to test if Jason's movie fights were as real as the tabloids sometimes claimed. The mother looked between them, eyes flickering with both fear and gratitude. Her son hugged her leg tighter, burying his face in her jeans. Jason set the apples down on a nearby shelf, freeing his hands. "Don't." "Not here," he warned quietly, darting a quick glance to the mother and her boy. "You want to act tough? Let's step outside and see how tough you can be." The shorter man began to advance. Then, as if remembering they were under the harsh glare of security cameras, both bullies hesitated. A single grocery clerk was peering around the end cap, eyes wide. The standoff drew the attention of a few more shoppers, who were torn between wanting to watch a Hollywood star in action and not wanting to get caught in the crossfire. Quietly, With slow, jerky steps, the men backed off. The shorter one let out a hollow laugh. "Fine," he said. "We'll let this go for now. But maybe we'll run into you in the parking lot, tough guy." Jason said nothing as they retreated. He exhaled softly once they turned a corner and disappeared among the shelves. With a polite nod to the stunned clerk, he bent down to the young boy's eye level. "You all right, mate?" Jason asked gently. The boy peered at him through teary eyes, nodding shyly. His mother, still clutching the grocery list as though it were her lifeline, let out a broken laugh. "Thank you," she managed. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." "You're safe," Jason said. "But keep your eyes open, yeah? People like that don't always give up." Something in her expression shifted, relief mixed with uncertainty. She extended her hand. "I'm Lori, and this is my son, Oliver." Jason shook her hand lightly, feeling the tremble still in her grip. "Jason," he replied with a gentle smile, "let's make sure you finish shopping in peace. You two mind some extra company while you browse the aisles?" Lori glanced at Oliver, who nodded eagerly, starstruck now that the fear had subsided. She turned back to Jason and let out a breath. "We be grateful." Within minutes, a fragile calm returned to the grocery store, but the tension lurked in the air like a storm cloud. Neither Jason nor Lori suspected their brief encounter would set off a chain of events that would challenge them both, far beyond a single confrontation with a couple of punks. Because bullies don't always come in pairs, and heroes aren't always recognized until they're left with no choice but to step into the line of fire once more. A few minutes later, the awkward hush in the grocery store gave way to the mundane churn of everyday life. Jason found himself walking alongside Lori and Oliver, pushing a cart that squeaked with a bent wheel. A shop radio crooned a tune that only half the store could hear properly, and an overworked stock boy announced the day's produce specials through a crackling PA system. It felt surreal to be strolling down aisles with two people he'd met only moments earlier. It's something about Lori's open vulnerability, combined with Oliver's quiet awe, made Jason feel oddly protective. "It's just me and Oliver," Lori explained, pausing by the dairy case to grab a carton of milk. She was still visibly rattled, glancing over her shoulder every so often. His father left when he was still a toddler, and she shrugged, trying to toss off her situation as though it were simply life. "We've been managing, but sometimes," she swallowed, pushing her hair behind her ear. "Sometimes men see a lone woman with a kid and think it's open season." Jason's jaw clenched. He'd seen that sort of opportunism before. "I'm sorry," he offered. "No one should have to look over their shoulder while buying groceries." She gave him a half smile, part grateful, part exhausted. "Thanks. And sorry. I know you must have plenty of other things to do than follow us around." "You are you?" He glanced down at the eggs in her cart. The brand was the cheapest on offer, and every item seemed carefully chosen on a tight budget. "Don't worry about it," he said. "I'm not on set. No schedule. Besides, your Oliver reminds me a bit of my nephew." If someone threatened him, he trailed off, letting his tone fill in the words left unsaid. Oliver looked up, curiosity sparkling in his dark eyes. He tugged at Jason's sleeve. "Are you a Real fighter, like in the movies?" Jason crouched down, meeting the little boy's inquisitive stare. "Depends. Sometimes in movies, they let me do my own stunts. I used to train a lot in martial arts. But real fighting? That's different. Gotta pick your battles." Oliver frowned thoughtfully. "Like picking out vegetables at the store?" Lori let out a genuine laugh, the tension momentarily easing. Jason grinned at Oliver's earnest innocence, ruffling the boy's hair. "Precisely, mate. Choose carefully." They continued through the aisles, and with each step, Jason tried to shake the feeling that those bullies weren't done. Something about the shorter one's stare, a twisted mix of resentment and humiliation, unsettled him. If there was one thing he'd learned about bullies, it was that their pride couldn't handle being made to look weak. And humiliating one in public was like flicking a match near a gas leak. "I'll pay for this, and we'll get out of here," Lori said, voice wavering slightly. "I think we got everything." Jason nodded, scanning the ends of each aisle. He caught glimpses of shoppers pushing carts, rummaging through discount bins, and bored kids trailing behind their parents. No sign of the men. But an unease settled in his gut, an intuition he'd honed over years of confrontation, on screen and off. At the checkout, Lori began placing items on the conveyor belt. Oliver reached up on tiptoes to help, carefully stacking cans of vegetables. The cashier offered a polite smile, obviously aware that something had happened, but not wanting to pry. "That'll be $56.20, the cashier said. The number was announced with a kind of sympathetic gloom, as if she knew how tight money could be. Lori hesitated, counting out bills from her purse, face flushed. She tried to conceal her worry, but Jason saw it. Without making a fuss, he dug into his own wallet, discreetly sliding a few bills her way. "You don't have to," Lori began. Jason shook his head. "I insist. Think of it as a thank you for letting me keep you company." She paused, torn between gratitude and pride. Then, with trembling hands, she accepted his help. He paid, swiftly, so she wouldn't linger in embarrassment. The cashier, taken aback, gave a friendly nod in Jason's direction. "Class act," she murmured. Lori offered Jason a quiet, "Thank you," her voice unsteady. Oliver, oblivious to the complex adult emotions swirling around him, just beamed. They were out of the store in a minute, stepping through the automatic doors into a bright afternoon sun that felt almost too cheerful after the tense encounter inside. The parking lot was a broad expanse of asphalt, shimmering in the heat. Cars lay scattered in a haphazard arrangement. Some had parked with careful lines, while others straddled two spots. Jason immediately scanned the area. Across the lot, he spotted the shorter bully leaning against a dusty sedan, fiddling with a cigarette. A scowl darkened the man's expression when his gaze locked onto Jason. The taller one was rummaging in the trunk for something. "Walk calmly," Jason murmured to Lori. They made their way toward Lori's battered hatchback, which was a couple of rows away from the bully's car. Oliver, holding his mother's hand, seemed to sense the tension and kept quiet. Jason took each step with measured slowness, ready to spring into action if need be. The bullies exchanged words, then began a trail behind. The hairs on the back of Jason's neck stood up. This was the moment he dreaded, that split second when aggression flared anew. He could almost feel the hostility boiling off them. But just as the shorter man began to stride their way, an old sedan rumbled across the parking lot, blocking the men momentarily. A harried father hopped out, wrestling with a laundry list of tasks. That small interruption broke the bully stride. By the time the men cleared the passing car, Lori had unlocked her hatchback, and Jason was helping load groceries. The shorter man finally reached earshot. "You think you're some big shot, don't you?" His tone oozed bitterness. Coming to the rescue, throwing money around, playing the hero. "Let me guess. You figure you're unstoppable?" Jason didn't bother turning around. "No," he replied, securing Oliver's seatbelt with calm efficiency. "Just decent. You've embarrassed us twice now." The taller bully's voice sounded closer. "No one disrespects us like that." Lori stood at the rear of her car, fear dancing on her features. Jason shut the hatch and stepped forward, standing between the men and his new friends. "Then maybe try not to do disrespectful things," he suggested coolly. The shorter one dropped his cigarette on the ground and crushed it underfoot. "Funny, I don't recall asking for advice." Jason's eyes flicked to Lori, silently telling her to get in the car. She nodded, quickly slipping into the driver's seat, but her gaze lingered anxiously. The men edged closer, shoulders tensed, obviously itching to regain some sense of dominance. Jason let out a slow breath. He didn't want to fight, especially not in front of a child. But if that was the only language these men understood, he'd speak it fluently. "Lori," he called over his shoulder, "drive. Now." She hesitated. "But go," Jason insisted. "Don't argue." With a shuddering nod, she turned the ignition, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. Oliver squeaked, "Mr. Jason," from the back seat, but Jason gently placed a palm on the window as the car began to move. He offered the boy a reassuring wink. The two bullies slid into an aggressive stance the moment the car pulled away. Jason quickly raised both hands, palms outward in a defensive posture. "You don't want to do this," he warned, voice low. "Not here, not like this." And That was all the coaxing they needed. The tension snapped like a brittle twig. The taller man lunged, fists swinging in wild arcs. The shorter man flanked his partner, rearing back for a cheap shot. Jason braced, adrenaline spiking through his veins, ready to deliver a different sort of shopping experience than the store had bargained for. He couldn't have known that a half-hidden camera phone, held by an unsuspecting witness, was already rolling, capturing every second. The taller bully's first punch whistled past Jason's left ear, missing by inches. Jason leaned back instinctively, letting the blow lose momentum. With fluid quickness, he countered by slamming an open palm against the man's shoulder, forcing him off balance. The shorter bully capitalized on that moment, trying to sweep Jason's legs from behind, but Jason spun, using the momentum to pivot away from the sweep. "Stop!" a voice shouted across the parking lot. It came from the harried father who'd stepped out of his sedan. He stood there, groceries half spilling from his arms, eyes wide. But none of the men listened. Adrenaline and bruised egos didn't stop for bystanders. Jason knew how fights in the real world could get messy. In the movies, every blow was choreographed. Here, each second felt dangerously unpredictable. He dodged a second swing from the taller man, then snapped out a precise kick to the side of the shorter man's knee, forcing him to stagger. The shorter man yelped in pain, but behind the anger, there was a flicker of surprise, as if he hadn't expected a Hollywood actor to actually know how to fight. The crowd of onlookers grew by the second. A few grocery store employees rushed out, uncertain whether to intervene or call the police. Cell phones were raised, capturing the scene. Meanwhile, Jason sidestepped another wild punch and fired back with a short, controlled jab to the taller man's ribcage. He felt the strike connect, a dull thud that told him it hit home. The taller man lurched back, clutching his side, breath escaping in ragged gasps. Spitting fury, the shorter man lunged forward with surprising speed, driving his head low for a tackle. Jason braced, hunching his body just enough to absorb the impact. The two went crashing onto the pavement, skidding against loose gravel. "Get off him," someone yelled. Another voice cackled. "Statham's got it covered." With a sharp twist of his torso, Jason threw the bully off. A quick glance confirmed the taller man was still gasping for air, incapacitated for the moment. Jason rolled to his feet and drew in a lungful of summer heat, knuckles tingling with the effort of controlling the fight. The shorter man scrambled to his feet, veins bulging in his neck. With a roar, he launched at Jason again, rage overshadowing any strategy. Jason dropped low, hooking the man's arm and flipping him onto his back with a grim efficiency. The bully landed with a winded yelp, his breath knocked out of him. For a moment, neither attacker rose. They lay on the asphalt, dazed and thoroughly humiliated. Jason stood there, chest heaving, scanning the area. The onlookers parted, forming a wide circle. Someone patted Jason on the back, murmuring, "You showed them," but he barely registered the praise. His first thought was Lori and Oliver, hoping they'd driven off without seeing too much. He stooped to pick up a set of keys that had fallen from one of the bully's pockets. The keys glinted in the afternoon sun, a battered keychain attached. He felt a pang of pity, fleeting though it was. A life dedicated to intimidation and violence often wasn't an easy path. But bullies made choices, and they had to live with the consequences. Sirens blared in the distance. A hush fell over the impromptu crowd. One of the store employees finally said, I called the police." Jason nodded wearily, probably for the best. An hour later found Jason seated on the curb, discussing the incident with a pair of police officers. The bullies were cuffed near a squad car, with paramedics checking them out for minor injuries. Several witnesses offered statements. More than one phone had footage that showed a clear story. Two men trying to provoke and assault someone else who defended himself. The police officers recognized Jason instantly, but protocol was protocol. They asked him a barrage of questions, took down his address, phone number, and asked if he wanted to press charges. The older officer, with deep lines across his face, scratched his head. "Some folks are going to have a field day with this," he muttered. "Movie star brawls in grocery parking lot." That's a headline. Jason exhaled, gaze drifting across the asphalt to where the store manager was sweeping up scattered groceries. Couldn't be helped, he said simply. They threatened that woman, threatened me. I had to do something. The officer nodded, satisfied. Another officer escorted the two bullies, now subdued, into the patrol car. The shorter one shot Jason a venomous glare through the window. His lips curled into a silent promise of revenge, but Jason ignored it. He'd seen that look before, on and off the silver screen. By the time the chaos subsided, the sky had begun to turn a dusky orange. News vans were already converging on the parking lot. Local networks that found out from social media. Jason rolled his shoulders, feeling the stiffness set in. A mild throbbing in his shoulder reminded him he wasn't 20 anymore. Or maybe real fights just hit different than the choreographed dance he was used to. He trudged back into the grocery store to fetch his own abandoned cart. He found it next to the produce display, still loaded with apples and a few basic items. As he retrieved it, the older woman stalker, who had recognized him earlier, caught his eye. "You okay, Mr. Statham?" "Yeah," he said, forcing a small smile. "Just a bit unexpected." She nodded sympathetically. "I can't stand bullies. Some days, I just wish more folks stood up to them." She paused, then offered him a bottle of water from a nearby fridge. "On the house. You look like you need it." Jason accepted with a grateful nod. "Thank you." He was about to push his car to the checkout when he heard his name called. Lori stood there, gripping Oliver's hand. She must have circled back. Her face was a flurry of emotions: concern, guilt, relief. "We saw some of it," she said softly, eyes darting toward Oliver. "Not all, but enough to know you handled them." Jason shrugged, unscrewing the water bottle cap. "Couldn't let them hurt you. Or the kid. You okay? I told you to drive off." She nodded. "We did. But then I didn't want to leave you behind. I ended up parking across the street. Oliver was worried about you." She glanced down at her son, who hid behind her leg, suddenly shy again. Jason knelt to Oliver's height. "You shouldn't have to see that sort of thing," he said gently. "But sometimes standing up is necessary. Doesn't mean it's good or fun. Just means you don't let bad guys push you around." Oliver gave a solemn nod, small fists curled against his sides. "You got them good," he whispered, a bit of awe returning to his voice. Jason mustered a smile. "Yo, now I've got to figure out how to get home in one piece without the reporters chasing me." Already, camera lenses were visible through the store windows. Lori bit her lip, looking troubled. "You can't face them alone," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "They'll hound you with questions. And those two creeps, who knows what they'll do if they get out on bail." Jason's gaze swept the store once more. He saw the manager, busily deflecting a local reporter who'd slipped inside, hungry for a story. "That's part of the job sometimes," he said. "But you don't have to get mixed up in it. You and Oliver need to keep safe." The exhaustion in Lori's eyes was hard to miss. "We've never really been safe," she admitted quietly. "It's just how life is when you're struggling with finances, no family nearby, always moving. But you came along, and we owe you." Jason tucked his hands into his pockets. He thought about the fleeting connection they'd formed in the aisles of a mundane grocery store. "All right," he said softly. "I have a proposition. Let's get out of here, away from these cameras. Maybe we could talk about how to keep you safe. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I can at least help for a bit." Lori's shoulders sagged in relief. "We'd like that," she said, voice thick with gratitude. Oliver grinned, adjusting the little backpack he wore. And for a brief moment, standing there in the fluorescent glow, Jason felt a flicker of hope. Hope that he could do more than just fight. Maybe he could make a lasting difference for someone who desperately needed it. They ended up escaping through a side entrance, a frazzled teenager in a store apron pointing them to a narrow delivery hallway that led out to a loading dock. By the time they emerged into the open air, the evening sky had begun its deep dive into twilight, painting the horizon with violet and crimson. Jason guided Lori and Oliver to his car, a modest SUV he'd rented for a low-profile trip. He wasn't in town for any big production. Ironically, he'd come seeking some peace and quiet. They piled in, adrenaline still humming through their veins. Oliver stared out the window, occasionally sneaking glances at Jason. Lori kept wringing her hands, betraying her jittery state. Jason navigated away from the grocery store, weaving down side streets, to avoid the swirling throng of news vans that had started blocking the main intersection. 15 minutes later, they found a small diner perched on the edge of town. Its neon sign flickered precariously, and the parking lot was nearly empty, exactly what Jason was looking for. He parked, and they quietly made their way inside, settling into a corner booth. It had that old-school feel. Red vinyl seats, a jukebox in the corner, and the faint scent of frying oil clinging to every surface. A waitress meandered over, eyeing them with a tired smile. "What can I get for you folks?" Jason glanced at Lori and Oliver. "Food, definitely," Lori said softly. "If that's okay." She looked at Jason, uncertain. "We didn't really plan for this." Jason waved off the concern. "My treat. Let's regroup. We all need something in our stomachs." They ordered burgers and a small plate of fries for Oliver, who was visibly caught between excitement and the lingering stress of the day. Jason tried to meet the boys' gaze and offer a reassuring grin every once in a while. Meanwhile, Lori shifted, hands clasped in her lap. She wore a conflicted expression, like 1,000 thoughts were jostling for attention inside her head. When the waitress left, Lori finally spoke. "I appreciate what you did," she began. "But I'm worried. People like those bullies don't just vanish because they got arrested." Jason nodded. "They might hold a grudge. Believe me, I understand." He paused, remembering the malignant promise in the shorter man's eyes. "But going to jail, at least for a short while, may give them some time to rethink. The bigger problem is how to protect you and Oliver in case they don't." She bit her lip. "I have a small apartment," she confessed. "Not in the best part of town. Security's not great. I usually come straight home after work, keep to myself, but that doesn't stop random threats. Financially, I'm barely scraping by. I don't have the means to just move somewhere else." Jason listened quietly, absorbing the weight of her words. He'd grown up without many luxuries, but his life now had turned a corner of stability most people never got. And that discrepancy was hitting him hard, making him realize how precarious some people's existences could be. "What about family?" Jason asked gently. "None around," Lori admitted. "My parents passed a while ago, and my grandmother's in an assisted living facility 2 states over. She's not in great health, and she can't help with anything, especially financially." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I've considered leaving this town, but the truth is, I have no place else to go. At least here I have a job, minimal as the income is." Oliver clung to his mother's side, sensing the anxiety in her voice. Jason reached across the table and gently touched Lori's hand. "We'll figure something out," he said, voice low but firm. "First, let's eat and settle down. We'll plan from there." Their food arrived. For a few moments, they ate in relative silence. The only sounds were the soft clinking of silverware and Oliver's occasional hum of delight whenever he dipped a fry into ketchup. Jason, scanning the diner, noticed a couple at the counter glancing his way. He quickly lowered his gaze, trying not to invite recognition. The day had offered more than enough attention. Eventually, Lori pushed her half-eaten burger aside. "I can't believe I'm sitting here with Jason Statham, of all people, talking about my life problems." Her voice quivered with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You don't owe me anything, but I'm so thankful you've done this much." Jason shrugged, offering a small smile. "Right place, right time. And besides, I was raised not to walk away when someone needs help." She nodded, eyes glassy. "Thank you." They talked in low tones about practicalities. Maybe she could stay in a motel for a couple of nights, but finances were an issue. Maybe Jason could make some calls. But who would he call in a town he barely knew? The local authorities? That might only inflame the situation further if the Bullies' associates found out. Oliver, bored by the serious conversation, slipped from a booth to explore the old jukebox in the corner. He pressed a few buttons, enchanted by the neon glow, though it seemed the machine was out of order. Jason watched him with a fond smile. "He's a curious lad," he noted. Lori followed his gaze. "He's the best part of my life. I'd do anything to keep him safe." Jason looked back at her. "Then that's what we'll focus on. Safety. A few moments later, the glass door of the diner whooshed open. A gust of evening air swept in, bringing with it a man in a dark jacket. He scanned the room and froze momentarily when he saw Jason. Their eyes locked, and the man's expression shifted into something between awe and suspicion. He fumbled for his phone, clearly recognizing the actor. Jason tensed. He didn't need more coverage, not now. Fortunately, the man seemed more starstruck than malevolent. He mouthed Jason Statham across the diner, brandishing his phone like a paparazzo's camera. Jason sighed, shaking his head slightly. The man hesitated, seemingly debating whether to approach. Lori noticed too, and a flicker of anxiety crossed her face. She'd already had enough excitement for one day. But before the stranger could make a move, the diner's manager intercepted him with a polite, "Can I help you?" Jason shot the manager a thankful nod. Sometimes small-town courtesy had its perks. "We should get going," he murmured to Lori. She nodded, and they paid quickly, collecting Oliver from his jukebox expedition. The plan, hastily hammered out. Jason would drive them to her apartment, help them check for anything suspicious, then decide what next steps to take. Maybe, if the neighborhood felt too risky, they'd figure out a safer stopgap. They left the diner under the watchful eyes of the starstruck newcomer, who had started recording from the corner of the room. Jason felt a jolt of annoyance, but pushed it aside. The immediate priority was Lori and Oliver's safety. Back on the road, Oliver dozed off in the back seat, lulled by the hum of tires on pavement. Lori gave directions in hushed tones, pointing out landmarks in her rundown neighborhood. A graffiti-strewn wall near a boarded-up cinema, a strip of shuttered shops that had once been a bustling market. It felt like a place time had forgotten. Finally, they pulled up to a dilapidated apartment complex with chipped paint and a flickering porch light. Jason scanned the shadowy corners, the half-lit stairs leading up to Lori's door. His instincts prickled. He parked close to her unit, stepping out first, scanning the area before motioning for Lori to follow. She hefted Oliver, still asleep, into her arms. Inside, the apartment was small and sparse but tidy. Toys lined one corner of the living room. A second-hand couch took up another. The kitchen was cramped, the counters stacked with a mix of discount groceries. Photos were taped to the fridge, Oliver's scribbled art, a snapshot of Lori with an older woman who must have been her grandmother. "You've made it cozy," Jason remarked softly, lowering his voice so as not to wake the child. "Yeah," Lori said, exhaling. "It's not much, but it's ours." They set Oliver in his bedroom, tucking him in gently. The child stirred only once before sighing contentedly and drifting deeper into slumber. Lori's eyes shone with maternal tenderness as she watched him. Jason lingered in the doorway, a mixture of admiration and concern coursing through him. After quietly closing the door, Jason turned to the living room window that overlooked the parking lot. He peered outside, scanning for any signs of the Bullies or other suspicious activity. The darkness revealed only a single flickering street lamp and a scattering of old cars. No immediate threat, at least for the moment. "We'll need to consider the long game," Jason said softly, moving away from the window. "I don't want you jumping at shadows, but those two might come looking for payback. It's possible they'll be in custody for a bit, but you never know." Lori folded her arms, shivering despite the warm evening. "I can't live with that kind of fear," she whispered. "Not with Oliver here." Jason set a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You won't. I promise. Let's figure something out. Maybe a better security setup or a place to stay temporarily while you figure out your next steps. I'm not an expert in all this, but I can help financially, and I've got a few connections who might offer legal advice." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding. I really don't know how to thank you." Jason squeezed her shoulder gently. "You already have," he said simply. "You trust me enough to let me help. That's all I need." A fragile silence settled between them, charged with the awareness that this was only the beginning. Neither of them knew how the next days, or even hours, would unfold. But in that still moment, they found a flicker of solace. Because sometimes it just takes one decent person, one spark of kindness to tilt the odds in your favor. Outside, The solitary street lamp buzzed faintly. In the distance, sirens wailed, though whether they were heading toward another crisis or echoing from earlier, Jason couldn't tell. Either way, he steeled himself for what might come next, determined that this woman and her child wouldn't face it alone. He stood guard by the window, thoughts churning with half-formed plans, ready to fight again if need be. But for the first time in a long while, the fight felt personal. It wasn't about a script or a camera or a choreographed stunt. It was about protecting people who mattered, and doing so in a world where heroes were in short supply and bullies often had free rein. Jason Statham, the Hollywood icon, had stumbled into the most unexpected role of his life, and he intended to see it through to a finale that didn't end in another battered parking lot, but in something better, hope for a single mom and her child. And maybe, in the process, a reminder to himself that sometimes the bravest battles are fought far from any silver screen.